You're listening to Halfway There. Experience the Christian journey. My name is Eric Nevins. I am your host. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm very excited that you are here, and I'm excited to bring you another interview with one of my friends and his story of coming to faith in Christ. What's interesting about this episode today is the way that my friend came to Christ. If you listen to the interview, it took a really long time. And, when I was growing up, the stories that we loved were the ones where, there was a dramatic turnaround. Somebody had a very, deep slide into darkness and maybe a drug addiction or alcohol addiction or something. And then they meet Jesus and suddenly everything is fantastic. And those are the stories that we shared. And it's a great story. God is powerful, and I love it when he does things like that. Those stories are amazing and absolutely wonderful. But they're not every story. And so I'm excited to share with you this story today from one of my friends who came to Christ over a very long period of time. He knew that he wanted Christ, desired to have the Lord in his life, and so he kept going to a place where he knew God could be found. And eventually God got a hold of his heart. Well, how? Well, you'll just have to listen and find out. Here's my interview with my friend, Doug Eisenbrandt. Doug, thanks for sitting down with me. I sure appreciate it.
You're welcome.
You and I really got to know each other a few years ago, and I think it might even be 5 years ago now, in that men's group that we had one summer.
Yes.
And that was a powerful time. In fact, that was, I think, one of the first times that I started to think about how powerful stories were, which, of course, is what the show's about.
Sure.
Because we went around and all the guys shared our story, and everybody had something that God had done, some way that God had reached us, and that was really powerful. And there was a lot of, whether it was something that we were struggling with, or just ways that God broke into our life when we needed him. It was really powerful. So, and that was your impetus. So in some ways, I guess maybe we can give you a little credit for this, what we're doing here.
Sure.
So I thank you for sitting down with me. Why don't you just go ahead and tell us a little bit about who you are, and we'll go from there.
My name's Doug, and Doug Eisenbrandt. I was born in Manhattan, Kansas. My dad was military, so I lived quite a few places. Very transient, but I think it helped me develop ways to get friends easy, to communicate with people when you're forced to start fresh every couple years. People go, "Was that hard?" And when it starts at 6 months, you don't know anything else. So
yeah,
it's a great place. Lived in the four corners of the U.S. and got to see a lot of the U.S. So it was great. Didn't really grow up in a Christian family. We go to church for the holidays, but good moral parents. Did a lot of volunteering that has carried over to me. Very loving home, very open about being proud and loving my sister and I. Never had any arguments, and you could look at that as a good or bad thing. But it was just a good home to grow up in. A lot of support, a lot of love.
Yeah.
So I really appreciated that. I've lived here in Colorado now since '96, so going on 19 years in the fall. Lived in the Springs a couple years, and then up here in Denver for most of the time. Love it here. Hope I can stay here, and I've got a wife that I met out here, and 3 boys that are 7, 5, and 3. And just love Colorado, the atmosphere, the beauty. Love to fly fish. So it's a great place to be for that. The interesting thing is I've skied more in Colorado when I didn't live here than when I have.
Right.
You just get tired of the I-70 parking lot and the cost. It's like ridiculous how much it costs. But so I went. We stopped moving when we moved to Michigan, and I lived there for 15 years. Went to junior high school, and college there, and then moved out here a few years after I graduated, and then got a master's out here at CU Denver. I did corporate finance work, budget planning, forecasting, for an engineering and architecture firm, a privately owned smaller company, but it's a great company, very good culture, very strong culture, and I would love to finish my career there. So
awesome.
Yes.
Cool. Well, thanks for sharing all that. So
sure.
This is really about your journey and your journey with God. So tell us how, and all that moving, how did you meet Christ?
So the real introduction, like I said, we go to church. I even remember my parents sending my sister and I to Sunday school. I remember being in Sunday school in a number of places we lived, but nothing really sunk in. The transition, the eye opener, and where the Lord grabbed my heart was when we moved to Michigan. We moved there in the fall. The next summer, my dad and his brothers had grown up going to summer camp in the Ozarks in Missouri, and the director of the camp there, Dick Marsh, was the director of a YMCA camp outside of West Lafayette, Indiana. So when we moved to Michigan, we were close enough to finally go. So called him up and got my sister and I a couple of spots for summer camp. And we drove down and went down there. And it's YMCA camp, but Dick had brought the motto, I am third. You put God first, everybody else second, and yourself third. The staff was filled with believers. The year-round staff, the vast majority of them were believers. Dick and his wife were believers. The associate director, Dave Wright, and his wife, Beth, were believers. So it was all around, and I just remember, you're saying devotions at night, you're going to chapel in the morning, singing grace at every meal. And I just remember thinking, it's just something very powerful in drawing me. I remember thinking, there's something really special here, and these guys are cool. They're like Christians, but they're like the coolest people. I was having the greatest time I've ever had in my life, in 2 weeks, and it just felt like that's not enough. I need to do this again. So we went the next summer. So it would be go there in the summer, and then you're back in school, and it just kind of fade away. And so the third year I went there, I was a counselor in training. They had a CIT program. And the day before I was supposed to fly home, that was just 2 weeks, the day before I was supposed to fly home, or my parents were going to pick me up, Dick came upstairs. I was in the apartment of Steve Bird. His nickname was Sharp. And Dick said, hey, we just had to let somebody go on staff. You want to stay for the rest of the summer? And I was like, yeah, you don't even have to pay me.
Wow.
I was like, yes, not a problem. So I ran down, called my dad, and he said, sure. So stayed there. Got to be great friends with a lot of the staff, just really soaking that up. Not understanding a whole lot, but getting the gist of Jesus and God and how much they love me. Yeah. And just a staff that was pouring his love, that were lights. It was like a light show there. Just real bright lights that I was just so drawn to. But I always felt like there was kind of a barrier, like I liked being around them, but I didn't feel like I belonged in there. And it wasn't like I felt like I was a horrible person, but I just felt like and it was nothing, absolutely nothing they were doing, but it was just like I felt like I like being a part of this club. I don't feel like I would ever be able to be in the club. And a part of that was just being young and not mature, and another part was being just spiritually immature and not understanding it. So through college, I worked there, and college, the bifurcation became greater between being there and not. But before I got to college, it was 1983, so I was 14, and I remember one night I had gotten our family Bible, we had one, and I just started reading through it, and I just did not understand anything. But because of camp, I'd started saying prayers every night. They're really basic prayers, and I kept saying the same thing over and over. But I remember having these prayers, and I started a correspondence with one of the year-round staff, Amy Beatty. Her name's Amy DeMoss now, but just asking all these questions about being a Christian. And I remember one of them was, if I speed and I'm breaking the law, is that a sin? And stuff like that. It was just very basic, but she was great. It was back when you wrote letters instead of texting or emailing, and
had to find a stamp.
Yes, but I remember she and I would write incredibly long, like 5-10 page letters. I would write out all these questions, and I just thought it was just so amazing. This person's taking the time to help me with this. And but when I was 14, I remember one night just laying in bed, and the window was just right. It was freezing cold. It was the middle of winter, but I could see the moon out there, and I remember just praying the prayer of salvation. So I had asked Amy, how do you, how are you saved? And because I just was not clear on all that. And so she had told me, and so I prayed that prayer of salvation. So I did that, but really had no support outside of camp. So when I was at camp, I was learning and growing in powerful ways. But like I said, when I got to college, did the fraternity, was just parties. And I always kind of told myself, well, I'm not partying like all these guys, and I'm not going after all the girls like these guys, but, I was still partying, and I always ended up dating girls long term, and through most of college I dated a girl from camp who went to Purdue, so I spent a lot of time down at Purdue. And then I'd work on the weekends, which I loved, because anytime I could get out to camp, I'd drive down on Fridays and then spend the weekends working at camp off season, because they had year-round stuff. And but I just, anything I could do to be at camp, I would do it. I'd go early and I'd stay late in the fall, because our school had shorter years than a lot of the colleges. And so it was a struggle, because I'm learning and growing at camp, and then I get to college, and it's like I live this other life. And so I felt very conflicted. Mm-hmm. But I always felt a peace at camp. I always felt loved unconditionally. I always felt, one of the songs they sing, it's a place where you can be who you always wanted to be. Yeah. And that's really yourself. And I always felt like there wasn't the cool crowd or the other crowd. It was just a crowd, and it was a beautiful crowd. And in my later years, when I would go back and reflect on this, and I'd be at camp, I really, there's really three places, and probably four places I felt the Holy Spirit in just powerful ways. Mm. And one of them's camp. And it really was, every time I was there, I mean, I can go there today and feel it. It's such a beautiful atmosphere. So many kids have come to Christ there. It's a warmth and a comfort that I've really never felt anywhere else.
Yeah.
Just an amazing place. I love that place with all my heart. I think it's just an amazing place. So that's where I was introduced to Christ. That's where I kind of always came back to Christ. I worked through all of college there, and then after I graduated, I actually went back and volunteered for a couple of weeks and worked after I graduated. But after getting jobs, I would just periodically come down for reunions, stuff like that, and to visit friends. My parents, at the time, from Michigan, they moved to Europe and they lived over there for 4 years, but then they moved back to Indianapolis. So whenever I'd go visit my parents in Indianapolis, I'd always make a trip up the road to West Lafayette to the camp. So that's how I came to know Christ. That's kind of how I started initially growing. Once college finished and then I was no longer working at camp. Like I said, I'd go back periodically. But that really, I never pursued church during that. I would sporadically, I would say, but never really pursued it. So I felt like the well would dry up. I would be filled up at camp and then it would just go dry. And, I see that now, and I think somebody asked me, if you ever had a chance to go back in life, at what stage would you go? And I always said, I'd go back to when I got saved. And what I would change is to find a support group, because I didn't have it at home.
Yeah.
I said my life would have drastically been different if I had found the support to really take that initial step once I've taken it and really continue that momentum. Because I ended up making my life start and stop, or even one step up and two steps back. And, that I would have changed. That's the one thing. I could think of a million things, but that probably would be the one thing that I would do if I had one thing I could change.
Interesting. Yeah, it's interesting to me because you could feel the difference, it sounds like, between, you could feel at home, at camp, and feel like this sort of, I might even say, the presence of Christ.
Yes.
Right, in that. And then to go home and not have that, but then not have any structure or have any way to kind of a community to keep you going.
Yeah.
It'll go away.
Yeah. The difficult thing was at home I had so much love and support.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it was like I felt like I didn't need anything else,
right,
because I had my security, I had my support, I had my unconditional love. But when I go to camp, I would get that in a more powerful way. Right. But I had something that I had had my whole life, and I thought, it just kind of made me lazy. Like, well, I don't need this because I've got it here at home.
So it's interesting. It sounds like, because your concept of church was holidays, the thing that we go to. It's not the people, right? Whereas what you're experiencing really was the church and the love of the church at camp.
Yeah.
And so, but you didn't associate that with a church.
No, the people that were there were, like I said, they were really the light of Christ. I mean, they were truly sharing the love and the gospel, and they were amazing people. They're still very near and dear to me. One of them, one of the more powerful people, they're Vince and Kirsten. They were single at the time, but then they got married. Vince I had as one of my groomsmen. Just such a powerful influence in my life. So I was grateful that he would come out with Kirsten and their son Josiah and attend and be in our wedding, because that was such an important thing. He'd been through they'd known me since I was 14 years old. So at the time I got married, I think it was about half my life they'd known me. So,
Wow.
and they prayed for me. They prayed with me. They had really been powerful. So just still truly powerful friendships that that I can still rely on to this day, and that's great for me. So afterwards, just I had to break up with a girl that had been dating for a while, and that really tore me apart. And instead of running to camp or to Christ or anything, I just, I still had my college buddies around, and they just pull you into the world. I don't blame them. It's the culture that we lived in, and it's my choice that I made. And I always justified things because I always said, well, I don't do things as bad as this person or that person, and that's just a dangerous place anytime you're justifying. So I moved out here to get away from Michigan and Detroit, and lived in the Springs for 2 years, and that was really hard. I was not ready for it. It was really God moving me out here. And again, I feel like that was a golden opportunity to run to Him and find what I was looking for in Him instead of the world. And I just continued to be a lost soul. It was really hard. I hated being single and living there. I felt like I needed to find a girlfriend, to find the love, to find the belonging. And the whole time, He's being patient and saying, I'm right here. So I'd have glimpses of that. Even started attending a church down there with a roommate that I got, but just ending up walking away. So moved up here to Denver, got a job with a new company up here, and continued to find solace and worth and belonging in the world, just hanging out with guys, playing sports, drinking on the weekends, just justifying, all of that because, the guys were doing it. That's what I kind of grew up in college, but just really feeling the emptiness. I think it was really a belonging in me that I longed for. Because anytime I go back to camp, it would be walking into the light, feeling my worth in Him versus the world, and always feeling, well, if I ever get too bad, I can always just go hang out and visit camp and kind of get recharged. But never looking for that outside of camp. Saying camp is my church, that's God, that's Jesus, that's all that. So having been saved at 14 and really just riding the roller coaster and never fully walking with it. So, the lifestyle just continued up here for probably about 6 years. And I remember it very distinctly. My alarm, it's those things that God played a part in it. I'd set my alarm, and I believe it was 6:30 because that's the time he's still on 94.7. Because I would always be drawn, if I had something come across in front of me that was Christian or God, I'd hang on to it. I didn't even own I had my parents' family Bible that was pretty beat up. It had bugs and stuff from camp in it, but I'd never had my own Bible that I would read and study. And I remember at 6:30 waking up to the alarm and just laying there listening, and it was Alistair Begg on 94.7. And just, I don't even know what the message was, but I was just like, wow, this is amazing. Again, it was just like camp. It was like, this guy's amazing. He's pretty cool. He's talking about things that I can relate to. And I'm just like, I was so drawn. I'm like, this is great. So I'd listen to him. And so at lunch, I remember being in the car and I heard Ed Taylor. This is before they had Grace FM. He was on 94.7. And I just remember thinking, whoa, this guy is amazing too. This is incredible. So I found myself being just drawn, just like I was at camp, like just in a powerful way. So I would go home every day. I found out that oneplace.com had all these sermons. This is before everything on the internet really took off. And so I'd drive home every day for lunch, have a bowl of soup, and listen to Ed Taylor. And every morning I'd listen to Alistair Beck. So I just kept listening and listening. I was still had this lifestyle, drinking, drowning my sorrows, and just feeling like I'm living in this world, but I'm start having this Holy Spirit taking a hold. Like, the conviction started, and okay, this is not right. You need to stop. This is not the crowd you want to. In fact, I didn't even really stop hanging out with the crowd. Things happened with those relationships that really kind of pulled them away, and I became. This had happened like a year or so before. Really kind of became more alone. I still had some friends that I'd hang out with, do stuff. Work, had a lot of friends, so would hang out with them. But this really, it took hold and it really started gaining momentum. I remember there was a bookstore down by my house, a Christian bookstore, and I walked in there and I'm like, I've been listening and I'd really like to buy a Bible. What do you recommend? So she asked some questions and pointed me to NIV Life Application Study Bible. And I remember going home, and it was like the coolest present I'd ever gotten in my life. I took it out and I started reading it from the copyright page, and all the history, the genealogy, the dates, and all the footnotes, and I was mesmerized and I was just blown away. I'm like, I could not get enough of it, and I was reading it and I was listening, and I was like, he was really stirring something up, and then I started feeling like, okay, maybe I want to do church, and about that time, I started volunteering. One of the common themes through my whole life is, as I talked about, I worked at summer camp with kids. Down in the Springs, I coached a Little League baseball team and a basketball team. So I got up here and I was like, I'd like to help out with kids. So another God thing, a lady at work had asked our company to sponsor a table at the annual gala for a nonprofit here in town. And she knew that I like kids and doing stuff. And she said, yeah, they do a lot of stuff with kids. She goes, why don't you come? We're going to have some other people at work. So I'm like, sure. So it was right when Invesco opened up. It was before the first football season, and the gala was there. And the organization was Lutheran Family Services. And they got up and talked about the services. And one of them was working with foster kids. So I looked them up online, got their phone number, called them up and said, I want to volunteer with foster kids. And they said, come on down. And so I started volunteering there and mentoring foster kids. And the lady that was in charge of the foster kid program there was Kelly Clausen, and her husband was a pastor up at Lookout Mountain at the time. And so she started inviting me to their small group and to church. So, that just kept the momentum and took it up a notch. I was still very conflicted because I still had one foot in the world, but I felt like I had one foot firmly planted moving towards Christ. So I was doing this back and forth, but I see now that the Lord was really laying the groundwork of getting my life in order and convicting me of, you've got this struggle with the world. I mean, you have had your feet firmly planted in the world. You've seen what I'm all about. And so that's going on. And then through Kelly and Doyle Lott, another person who worked there, I was getting an award at this organization for Volunteer of the Year, and I think I was the only volunteer. So, so I was getting the award, and they were both kind of prodding me, going, "You got to bring a date." And I'm like, "Well, I could ask my mom to fly out here." And they're like, "Okay, that's not going to happen." So
don't do that.
Yeah, don't embarrass yourself or us. So Doyle's daughter had grown up with a girl that had moved out here, and so Kelly had talked to Doyle and asked Doyle if he thought she would say yes. So Doyle said, "Well, I'll ask." So Doyle called up, and in fact, she was having lunch with Doyle's daughter when he called, and Doyle's wife, Polly, and so they asked if she'd want to go on a date, and so she said yes. So I called her up and I told her a little about what was going on, and she's starting to get a little nervous, she said later, because this was like a 3-hour event, because it's dinner and then the awards,
right,
and it's all this. So, but, I think she felt a little better because Doyle was at our table, so she had somebody she'd known since she was a little kid.
Yeah.
So we went to the gala, did the date, and I asked her out again, and 6 months later we were engaged, and 6 months after that we were married, and 6 months after that we were pregnant. But the whole time God was, I think he became impatient with me in his saying, his plans were to have this girl marry me and for us to have the family I'd always wanted. But my lifestyle and where I was at spiritually was nowhere near where it needed to be to make that happen. So when I look at the groundwork he laid, that was just a powerful time in my life. You'd mentioned before, one thing that happened prior to our engagement was marked men.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I know that was a powerful experience for you.
Yes. So that was Mike Clausen, Kelly's husband, the pastor I got to be good friends with. He had gone through it, and he said, "I think you're ready. This is the timing needs to be right, and I think the time is right." So that was another time when I felt the Holy Spirit in just an amazingly powerful way. A great ministry, powerful. I think one of the biggest things I took out of that was ownership of the stuff in my life and my decisions and my choices. It was not stuff, because I got used to putting on the face that everybody thought that Doug was just a great guy, and whatever struggles I had going on, nobody knew about.
Right.
And, I had a work Doug, and I had by myself Doug, and then I had, hanging out with the guys Doug. I could fit. I was a chameleon. I could fit them all real easy. This put the mirror out in front, and I think what helps me in being able to be with other guys and be open and talk about stuff is all that with Mark Men, because that's out there in the open, and the way it happens at Mark Men, is you see that, you share it, and you see it in others, and when you see it in others, you see how powerful it is when they're talking their testimony, when they're talking their struggles, when they're talking about things, because then you can relate. And that power has never left me, the feeling of how powerful that is. And that's why I have no issues. That's why I was adamant about the benefits I thought we could have in that group of guys to get together and share, because it's powerful. It really is. The Spirit can use that to plant seeds, to water seeds, or just to be able to further somebody's walk. And so Marked Men had a huge impact on how I deal with, the struggles that we all deal with in living in the world, not being of the world. And as I look back, or as I take a step back, it really helps me process it. It gives me a group of guys for accountability. It gives me a group of guys that I can talk to and say, hey, listen, I'm really struggling with this or that, or, what do you think about this? Or, this has been hard, or, it just helps me process things in a godly way with Jesus at the center of it, instead of, in the past saying, I'll just go to the bar and drink my sorrows away, or deal with it. I'll just put it under the rug and forget about it.
Yeah.
I'm not perfect in it still, but it really gave me the vehicle and the way to do it. So that weekend, and then there's follow-up weeks and groups, very strong in the Spirit, and in rock solid friendships that have come from that, and that I still have, that I really appreciate. So that happened right before we got engaged, and that's really been powerful for me, and I've shared that with other guys. So through the marriage, the other place, the third place that I felt the Spirit was on my wedding day, which was great. It was just just a peace, just a joy, and kind of like what I would have at camp, just a peace and a joy. I just felt His light shining on, like this moment He had in mind forever. And I just felt like that is just such a wonderful, it was wonderful to share that with so many wonderful friends, and it was just powerful in the sense that He was there. It was like one of those days where everything was just going right, and you just felt wonderful. It was just amazing. So I've continued with my relationships with my Marked Men buddies. My friendships now are really all surrounded more in believers. I still have my friends outside, and I share that, my college buddies, none of them are out here, and all the guys I used to go partying with here are, have gone or got their families, and so He's kind of helped make that transition easy, but I really have no desire to go back to that. I love spending time helping out kids. I don't volunteer at the organization, but I'm on their board, so I feel like I can be helpful there, help out in powerful ways. We go to Calvary, South Denver. I'm getting involved there with a group, trying to start a men's group, and really connecting with the families there. We had gone to South for a while, and we're still connected a lot with you guys. We're very thankful for that. And plus our kids all go to same place.
That's right. Our kids.
So that's a nice piece to it. So it feels good. I feel like I'm surrounded by just quality people, and my part in providing for our group, whether it's you guys or church, is talking what I'm doing now, sharing my experiences, being something that maybe they can relate to and say, that was a part of my life too, or that still is, and maybe I shouldn't do that, or however the connection is made, that I can share that and say, I'm not sharing it because I'm proud of it. I'm sharing it because I understand that where I've moved from and to is through the Holy Spirit and the love and the patience and the mercy and grace of God. And that's the story that I want to convey, is that He can take a wretch like me and continue to work on me and to move me from where I was just steeped in the world to a place now where I can be led by the Spirit, I can be connected in the Spirit, and understand that my imperfections are washed over by the blood of Christ, as opposed to a beer bottle.
Yeah, what's fascinating to me. So you said a little bit earlier you felt like you had work dug and
Yes.
Maybe church dug and different, like you were just different people. Do you feel like now you have more of yourself, like you're the same person?
Yeah.
All the time?
Yeah. The interesting thing is I feel like the core of who I always was has not changed. It's kind of how I live my life and make my decisions. Because I always felt like I was carrying, I've volunteered most of my life. I always had compassion. That's a gift that the Lord has given me that He's used in powerful ways. But I would always try to hide the stuff that I didn't like or I didn't want people to see. And it was easy when I was single. Right. I didn't have anybody really accountable to. Right. And that was real easy. But I find myself now saying there's more of me that I want everybody to see, because I've been able to get my feet outside of the world and into Christ. It's not that I don't trip and fall, but for instance, at work, we've had a lady that had pneumonia and then ended up in the ICU. She's a believer, and so I'd go visit her quite a bit in the ICU, and people from work would be there, or else I'd take people, we'd all ride together. And every time, I'm praying for her, and, she'd always ask me, can you pray? Can you pray? So I'd pray in front of work, and I didn't think twice about it. I didn't, I couldn't have done this before. I would have been like, I can't do this. I even had one of the ladies at work, she goes, well, did you used to be a pastor? And I'm like, no. She goes, well, you seem very comfortable praying out loud and in front of people. And I said, well, I appreciate that, but, this is somebody who's very, very sick and could die, and she's asking me to pray, and that's the most powerful thing I can do to help her. And so I've got executives coming with me, and I'm not hiding it, and I feel comfortable. I wanted people to always see that piece of me growing up through my life. Now I want people to see all of me, because that's the testimony to Christ, is the warts and all, the struggles, the amazing, powerful, and the ugly trash. Yeah. That's because then it's not what I've done, it's what He's done. And I think that's how you can really relate. I always love listening to pastors that share their testimony, that talk about their testimony, because then you can relate. You're like, You're not somebody behind the pulpit that's untouchable, that's perfect. You are somebody that has the same struggles I do. Right. And that's why I've really connected, like Philip Yancey, his books, because he talks about very real circumstances in his struggles and his chewing on things. Right. And I can easily relate to that. And that's what I try to have my testimony is to allow people to hear it, because some people will relate, some won't, some will. Right. But my job is just to relate my testimony as He's led me through this, and then let some people get fed by it, and other people have been like, wow, powerful, praise God. Right. So I feel like the chameleon, and that's always going to be a struggle. It's part of, I think I've always been a people pleaser, so I have to stop thinking about that and really I need to be who God has created me to be, and be the light, and to be in the Word, to be in Him, to be close to Him. so I can be a vessel. I pray that a lot, is to be a vessel, but I know to be a vessel, I don't have to be perfect, obviously, but, I've got to be walking in the Spirit, and I've got to be, my dry periods, my real struggles when I feel distant. I go, when's the last time I really spent quiet time? When's the last time I've been in the Word? When's the last time? And you can see that the well is drying up because you're not being fed.
Yeah.
And there's some dark periods that have been hard. But I will tell you, the dark periods in my life before I was walking really strong with Christ, just rely on myself and the world to get through it, But these struggles now, I find myself learning more about God, about my relationship with Him. I feel when I open up my heart and mind to Him, that He is quick to feed, to show.
Do you have an example of that you want to share?
I think through any times in life that you have struggles, you can. I think we all have choices, and I think they're forks in the road. So, we could look at stuff. We've had a lot of people around us lately have been sick, and a lot of pain and suffering, and that's hard when you don't feel like there's anything you can do physically, like. Especially as a guy, you just want to fix things.
Right.
So, I would say there are struggles that I've had lately with, especially being a compassionate person when other people are hurt, and even people that I've hurt, that I can choose to go through and and I think I still, in these struggles, I still find myself, I don't know if it's a first step, but I know it's a step that usually comes up is the world, where I'm like, well, I could get a six-pack and not think about this. So I would say recently, it's been struggle with so many close friends and multiple friends, that we have, both on her side and my side, believers struggling with life and death situations. And I never question God through this. I don't. It's not ever been a struggle for me to say why. My struggle is been, like I said, trying to find how can I help, what can I do, and especially when they're close to you. I find myself a lot of times not having the words that I feel like I should have, and then I reflect on my relationship with God, and okay, so if I'm not asking why, God, why are you doing this, and how can I help? It's how do I look at this in my relationship? And I always find myself being able to support others by conveying what He's done with me in my times of need, or in my struggles, what verses I found comforting, or as I've heard of others' testimonies in difficulties, being able to relate those as not as sympathy, like I know what you're going through, but as showing the face of God and the reminders that regardless of what we're going through, we should never question He's a good God and He knows more than us. And sometimes you end up knowing that the best thing you can do is just be quiet and pray. But I think the dark times in my life, the difficulties when I've struggled with relationships or events, every time He has shown me something new and different about His character.
So what's he showing you now? You're in this kind of place where people are...
Yep. So right now, I've got 3 words that he has shown me over and over again, and I'm doing word searches through the Bible and studies on not only where they're in the Bible, but the context.
Sure.
And trying to even be the spiritual nerd that digs into the Greek and the Aramaic and the Hebrew to study it. And going through the Calvary church study guides that really relay the context. And the 3 words are strength, courage, and perseverance. And it's not necessarily that I feel like he's saying directly you need to tell these people to do that. It's just relating that he does. I mean, he talks about if you get into like one of the Bible apps and type in for a search strong and good courage, they say good courage a lot, and I'm still digging into why that is why it says good courage, but it is mentioned a ton of times, strong and good courage, and I just feel like, for me, what he's teaching in the darkness of this is he's asking me on my part to be strong, to be of good courage, and to persevere. And those are things he's asking me to do.
Yeah.
So if I can focus on what does it take to be strong, to be of good courage, to persevere, through that, I'm going to learn more about him. I'm going to learn about his character, about the fact that he is a true God. He has promised things, and he doesn't back away from his promises. That he's a loving God, that he's a sovereign God, that there is nothing that happens to me that's not outside of his vision. But I think the one thing that I'm really taking away from all of this is he wants me to rise to the occasion. He puts these things in my life, and he wants me to get over them. My previous life, I would have forced myself over them through whatever things I could do to medicate, and felt like, okay, I accomplished it. I got to the other side.
Right.
Now I'm going over with his leading, and I know he's putting him in front of me. He puts me these things, and he expects me to rise to the occasion. How do I rise to the occasion? Through leaning on his strength to draw closer to him, to allow the things that happen in my life to mold me more like Christ, which I think is ultimately what we're all going through is to be molded more like him. But when you're being molded into something, you want to know about what is that something I'm being molded into. It kind of forces you to learn more about him. So where I used to run to the world, now to rise to the occasion, I run to him. I still trip and fall. I fall on my face. I still struggle with my doubts. But I find myself asking him to help me through those doubts. Help me through not trusting. Help me through, today is a bad day, and I don't even know if I believe this. Help me through that. And our pastor just did a passage in Matthew. We're going through the book of Matthew, and it was about praying. And, basically, he's talking about praying. He wants us to pray in earnest. And, if we pray, the doors will be open. And he wants us to pray and unceasing and over. And he doesn't mind hearing that same prayer if we're still having those struggles. And it really opened my heart and my mind to, I don't have to feel guilty. I've prayed this prayer a bunch of times, but I don't feel like I'm getting it, or I don't feel like I'm understanding, and that I can struggle and run to him and not struggle and run to the world. So through those 3 words, I'm chewing on those on a daily basis. I'm praying for him to understand strength and courage and perseverance, but I'm not running away from him. And
That's good. I think it's a great place to be when you can say to the Lord, I'm having my doubts, or I'm having a time when I know I normally would run to other things.
Yes.
But will you help me?
Yes.
But instead I'm bringing this to you because I know because that shows some trust in Him, right? That it's okay. Your faith doesn't have to be perfect to be good, to be full, right? Yeah. It just has to be present, right? It just has to look to Him and say, okay, so here's how I am. He already knows how you are anyway, right? He knows your proclivities. Yep. Here's how I am. God, what do you want to do? And then when we invite Him into those things, that's a powerful place to be. I love that. That's
good. Because then you're opening up your heart and really having the expectation of an answer, which you're kind of saying, I want to run to you. I don't know how to do that right now.
Right.
And I think that's part of, loving Him with all my heart, all my soul, all my strength.
It's that I believe, but help my unbelief.
Yeah, exactly.
The centurion says,
Because I'm going to you, I'm trusting that you're going to answer this. And I want that, because my struggle now is I see how I can run the other way. Mm-hmm. That's a comfort. I'll feel horrible after, but it's a comfort. Now it's a place I can go. It's familiar. I'm not so sure what your road looks like. I know it's narrow, but can you help me with that? And I think just by taking the time to sit there and pursue that path, that's been a huge step for me. So I think the expectation of an answer and being led and shown a path that's lighted, it's just being drawn and being taking that step, taking my prerogative. I mean, His plan will happen regardless. He'd like to use me for things, but if I'm not going to be walking with Him, He's not going to use me. And again, it kind of goes back to wanting to be a vessel and praying that a lot. But I know the steps and things that need to happen with that. So
awesome. Wow. So we're almost at an hour. So thanks for sharing. We could probably talk for another hour if we wanted to.
Yeah.
But you've been very generous and open. I appreciate that.
Sure.
Anything you want to leave us with?
I think what we touched on at the end, one of the things that I spent a lot of the first part of my walk with is asking without expectation. To just think, okay, He's a God that I can pray to and pray for, but really not have the expectation. And I think you think about, as you read the Bible and Jesus praying and talking about prayer. And it's really, truly the relationship. And as I teach my kids and we read the Bible at night and we pray with them, it's not just a prayer that you loft up there and it just kind of dissipates and goes away. It's truly having the expectation, because I think that involves two things. One, you touched on, is trust, but two is an ear to listen. And I think it's so important to take the time to listen to God, because I think He speaks to us in so many different ways. So I think that's something that I'm just starting to explore and understand and kind of chew on. And but I think that's powerful. It's not just putting the prayer up there and forgetting about it. It's really praying, because that will change, I think, what you pray for and how you pray, is if you have an expectation for something to happen. And because our pastor said God answers, and His three answers are either yes, no, or wait. So you're either going to you need to expect a yes, a no, and if you don't hear, then it's a wait. But that wait is not just sitting on your hands. It's digging in and praying. Keep praying.
Yep.
So
awesome. Thanks, Doug.
You're welcome.
Okay, there is my interview with Doug Eisenbrandt. Doug, thank you so much for sharing your story. I genuinely appreciated the way that you were open and authentic and shared so much about what God has learned, teaching you, and thank you for doing that. Hopefully for you, my friends, you heard something from Doug that resonated or related to your story. That's what I'm trying to do here. Because here I have this idea that God works with all of us in very different ways. He knows what we need. He knows who we are. He knows what we'll get through. And the question is, are we listening? Are we following? Are we after him? And I think what you heard in Doug's story is that he was after God and God was after him until finally he just gave in. Hey, maybe you want to catch some of the books that we mentioned or see the show notes. You can do that at my website, ericnevins.com. And as always, if you leave me a review in iTunes, sure would appreciate it. Until next time, keep the faith, my friends.